is in Ulaanbaatar, the capital city of the magnificent Mongolia. And today we have the honor of having with us Mr. Dulguun. He is a graduate from Harvard University, he's an economist, and he heads Mongolia's new revival or recovery policy. Welcome to Reason, the new Indians platform where we get to the reason behind the issues that concern you. Welcome, Mr. Dulguun.
Thank you.
I'm going to begin this conversation on Mongolia's new recovery policy. First of all, why does Mongolia need a recovery policy? I do understand that Mongolia has just risen out of a debt crisis which probably was triggered by the war in Ukraine and also by the coronavirus pandemic lockdown. Give us a context about what necessitated the recovery or revival policy.
What necessitated our recovery policy is first COVID. And also second, there is a huge potential just next door for Mongolia to recover faster than anybody else, and that would be China. And if you look at the entire globe and look at the growth rates of the countries, and the Chinese growth rate is kind of leading all those other countries. If you look at the forecasts 2023, Europe is almost growing twice or three times less than China. And if you look at the size, China is the biggest in PPP terms, purchasing parity terms. China is the biggest, and in real dollar terms, it's second biggest economy. So what happened during COVID is because of border closures and because of travel restrictions inside the country and outside the country, our economy kind of contracted about 5% in 2020. And then if you look at what's going on, especially to the war, there is a huge price increase in food items. If you look at United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization Index, food index, it increased significantly, and especially due to certain food items that's supplied by Ukraine and Russia, both of those countries. And in order to first recover fast, and second, to increase and utilize the existing potential, the new recovery policy has been designed. Okay,
so I understand that the Mongolian economy is $15 billion economy. I want to understand, how did Mongolia, which was once upon a time an agrarian livestock economy majorly, how did it switch from agrarian livestock economy to an industrial economy? And I also want to understand from you that is Mongolia a self-sufficient economy, because Mongolia imports a lot of its items from both China and Russia.
If you would like to know how Mongolia industrialized in the first place, we have to go back almost 50 years ago. 50 years, almost 70 years ago, our country was basically agrarian society, and with the help of Soviets back then, Soviet Union, there was many industries and many factories has been built. And without the Soviet Union's know-how and finances, it would have been very difficult for Mongolia to get industrialized. But if you look at what's happening around the world in the last 20 years, many countries, including the top industrial countries, they have been deindustrialized.
Yeah.
So the trend right now is not industrialization. The trend over the globe is deindustrialization.
Deindustrialization
Exactly.
of the West, actually.
Yes, not just the West, it's happening around the world.
Well.
And there are a couple of exceptions to that. Mexico is one exception, I would say. But what's happening is that because of this trend, there's underlying forces that's forcing this trend. First, of course, is automation.
Yes.
Many things has been automized, and therefore there been less need in this area. And the second is cost of things. And what's happening right now is the start of geopolitical fragmentation. I'm not sure how geopolitical this fragmentation is going to affect industrialization for lower income or middle income countries. For Mongolia, what happened is that Mongolia has been industrialized until 1990, and then because of change in the system, we had the biggest transition of the century in 1990 from centrally planned economy to market economy.
Yeah.
And we also transitioned one-party system to multi-party system, and in that regard, Mongolia became a democratic country in 1990 in a big, almost in a stroke. It didn't take that long. Just in a matter of a couple of months, our country became democratic, and we had our first election, a multi-party election in 1990.
Let me interrupt you. So in 1990, because of the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and you in a way gained independence as a satellite state of the Soviet Union after their disintegration, Mongolia, without the assistance of Soviet Union, went into recession. But it has done remarkably well in the last 30 years. And you said that industrialization, in a way, is the larger trend is everybody is getting deindustrialized. But we did see that in the last 30 years, Mongolia went big time into mining industry. So how did that happen, and what has that yielded for Mongolia in the last 3 decades?
By luck or other means, the location of Mongolia is between Russia and China. And if you look at statistics on China, China consumes more than half of many of those minerals, right? For example, look at copper.
Yes.
Look at aluminum. Look at iron ore. It consumes in huge amounts. And it's not just for export-oriented industries that they use it for, but also for local domestic consumption.
Local consumption.
In 2010, we've been doing some studies, and I came across some of those reports. And those reports said that China, in next 10 years, going to build 50 New York-sized cities. Wow. So, the amount of buildings materials required, the amount of cement, the amount of iron bar. Imagine how much it's used to build New York City, and multiply that with 50, right?
So that says that Mongolia has a great future as well.
It is. I have no doubt on the future of Mongolia. It's also, what's important is, other than mining, Mongolians have a great potential. It's not just the minings that we have to dig up and then ship it across the border, but also we have to think ourselves how to value add on those minerals, and also how to supply Chinese population with other items such as food. And I would say Mongolia has great potential in this consumption sector, which is food, right? We have the 18th biggest land on earth, and Mongolia is the least dense country in the world.
Yes.
If you divide the size of the country with amount of the population, there is 1 square kilometers, there are 2 people.
Wow.
So I'm not sure how is India.
No, yeah. I mean, India is the reverse.
just if you think about it, all we have is land. Land is the greatest resource if you use it well, right? If you planted certain crops, and without technology and know-how of those crop plantations, it will be very difficult for Mongolians to supply China. Right now, most of our population works in retail, industry, and
Services.
Services, yes. But we have amount of labor force working in agriculture. About, I would say, 3/4 of it is animal husbandry.
Yeah.
The rest is for plantation and crops, but it's all big companies and already known crops like wheat,
Yeah.
like potato, like carrots. But if you think of how many types of other vegetables Chinese use, the potential is enormous. And in terms of pricing, China is the kind of next, I would say next EU, I would say next USA, and it wouldn't take us that much longer and that much cost to transport it because it's just our neighbor.
So Mongolia has also been dependent on both China and Russia for lot of essentials actually, including food. In fact, the war in Ukraine actually did hamper and obstruct many countries which were dependent on Russia and European countries for food, especially Ukraine. How do you see your new recovery policy helping Mongolia bring self-sufficiency?
Underlying rationale for new recovery policy is not exactly self-sufficiency, no. It's how to build greater know-how.
Okay.
It's not even foreign direct investment. It's based on know-how. With the know-how of doing things, there are 3 types of knowledge. The first type of knowledge is what economists call it coded knowledge, meaning anything you can put on a paper.
Yes.
That's a coded knowledge. It's a math formula, any blueprints for factories, anything. The second type of knowledge, we call it tools. The phones, the camera, or the airplane.
The internet.
Anything that's, you don't have to know how to make it, but you can use it for greater purposes, right? Mm-hmm. The tools. The third type of knowledge, we call the know-how. And know-how, I would say, dentists. For example, I give you the book which all the dentists study, and you finish reading it, and I give you the tools that dentists use. You can't fix my teeth, right?
Yeah.
Where does know-how lies is here. And if you look at all the theories on economic development, and it give us many different directions. And if you just say which one is more important, which one is more practical, and do a lot of regressions and analysis, I've come to believe myself that know-how is underlying the development process. Whichever country builds know-how better, their economic growth is faster and their influence is bigger. So what's know-how and how we acquire know-how? The first way to acquire know-how is the most expensive way to acquire know-how is you do yourself, and then you make a mistake, you do yourself, you make a mistake. After many tries, you might succeed in acquiring that know-how. The cheapest way is to bring those foreign people to Mongolia and work with those foreigners, and that's the cheapest. And the third, which is in the middle, is we send our youth to different countries. Like if it's agriculture, we might even send to Korea, right? or India in that extent. And then once they learn how things are done, we bring them back after how many years. So these are ways to acquire know-how. And without acquiring know-how, it will be very difficult for Mongolians to export anything processed, because people, that know-how is required to process it by the world standard. Mongolian standard is not enough. We have to export anything with a standard, and that has to be world standard, or then we were able to increase our exports and increase our value add, everything locally. It doesn't have to be, when we say we increase the value add locally, it doesn't mean only Mongolians do it. It can be, we can do it with our Polish friends, we can do it with our Korean friends, we can do it with the Indian friends. It's win-win, right? They bring the know-how. So it's not about technology only.
So the focus will be capacity building. The focus will be learning new tools. The focus will be actually the knowledge.
Yes, yes. And in order to do that, we need to have ecosystem.
Yeah.
When I say ecosystem, I say their ecosystem of supply of other infrastructure first, and then second, supply of logistics, both soft and hard way. Let me explain a little more. Anything we do with, in terms of processing either food or minerals, we need energy, and therefore part of new recovery policy is energy. Without increasing supply of energy, it will be very difficult for local Mongolians as well as anybody who is investing in Mongolia to build factories, processing or food, whatever.
Yeah.
And the second is, if you read new recovery policy, we call it port recovery. Without higher capable ports that ship anything produced, including minerals, faster and cheaper.
Okay.
It will be very difficult for Mongolian investors and foreign investors to compete outside Mongolia. So it has to be cheaper.
How do you plan to make it so efficient that the cost of importing or exporting is low for Mongolia?
So we set in the new recovery policy the hard and soft ways. The hard way is build greater infrastructure. If you go to Zaming-ud port right now, there is a new construction just opened a couple months ago. So with both for freight as well as people, it's easier now to pass. And it's not just about only ports, it's also the infrastructure over until the factory floor, right? So there we are focusing on is that how to reduce cost and also how to increase or reduce time as well. So that's where the soft part comes in.
Yeah.
We have to improve efficiency, and a lot of things can be solved with better infrastructure, but not all of it. Like the processing papers, right? You would like to reduce that amount of papers required for export, and also reduce the time that's done by checking both number of agencies, how to reduce that agencies or how to reduce the time that each agency takes for their check inspection, basically.
Tell us also about the efforts or the initiatives that the Mongolian government took after this crisis, this debt crisis, where Mongolia had very little foreign reserves, and because of the pandemic, because of the lockdown, your supply chains were disrupted. How did Mongolia emerge out of that? What exactly did you guys do?
What we have encountered is there is risk on refinancing our existing obligation. Mongolia previously borrowed money from international investors, and there is a timeline of paying it back. And with a certain amount of reserve, unless we raise other bonds to pay existing ones, it will be very difficult for Mongolia to just take out of the reserve. Right? So that's what we call it, refinancing existing loans. So we didn't add any extra bonds on the international market to use it ourselves. We just place it on the international market to refinance the existing loans. So in that way, we were much safer than Sri Lanka. But also much safer than Sri Lanka is that the almost 90% of our exports go to basically 90% of our export is basically minerals, and almost 80-something% goes to China. So there is a cash inflow. We knew that our cash inflow. There was one issue with that. The only issue that were pressing us was that certain agreements to sell minerals were made with certain Chinese company, not just on a commercial base, but on a almost like a barter base, like we call it offtake agreements. Let's say I provide you 1 million tons of, let's say, coal, and in return you're going to build this railroad, right? So in that sense, if almost all agreements are done that way, there is no single dollar coming in. It's mostly constructions, right? So when the government foresaw that challenge, government took action to reduce the amount of agreements done in a specific different way, not just money transactions, and then took actions on existing agreements. In that way, we were able to build our reserve. Now we are at that level where Mongolia say, we'd like to reissue our bond to pay the existing one. And if international investors don't offer us too high an interest rate, a Mongolian government is able to pay from the reserve.
So what is the economic outlook for Mongolia going ahead with this recovery policy that is now being implemented?
The government's goal is triple our GDP per capita in 10 years. And we will see. It's a very challenging task, and there is very few countries that has succeeded doing so, and we hope we will succeed most of the way. But what we are doing is, at least whatever the outcome may be, we will resolve the challenges that's being faced by our local producers as well as our international investors.
So where are the challenging areas? What kind of challenges do you face at the moment? Also, I wanted to ask you, you said you will also be getting know-how how to grow crops, food, exporting food to China. That itself requires a lot of knowledge, of course, because Mongolia has very harsh weather. You don't have vegetable seasons all throughout the year. So one, I want to know the challenge areas, and second, how are you going to overcome them, including this food capacity?
The good thing is Mongolia has some resources. Even though we do not have good weather, we have a harsh winter, and which means everything stops growing if it's outside. But there is a huge improvement in technologies how to grow inside, inside the greenhouse, right? So inside the greenhouse, I expect there is only one type of weather.
Yes.
So that means we have enough potential. Also, in terms of land, there is just all we have is land.
Yeah, so when indoor today, in today's world, in indoor agriculture, you don't actually need lots of land. You can actually do it in a vertical building. That is also possible. So I want to know, like, how are you going to overcome the challenges, and what are the challenges really?
I would say the challenges for greater utilization of the existing potential is first was energy, and the second logistics. Okay. And all those are integrated into this new recovery policy: energy recovery, ports recovery, as I have mentioned, what we are trying to achieve. And when the transport logistics costs as well as time goes down, and as the market conditions improve, it will be easier for both Mongolian investors and foreign investors to do anything in Mongolia with the export goals. Because Mongolia, we have only 3.4 million people.
Yes.
And I don't expect many of our international friends to come to Mongolia just to supply the local market. No. What we have in mind at the government level is that let's use the potential together and build things here, and we provide much greater opportunity than our neighbors, and then utilize the markets that's just
So in which areas, which sectors do you see foreign investment coming in? You have a lot of land, but what will you offer with that land?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, the greatest areas that Mongolia has right now for investment is energy. When I say energy, it's not just mining, not just coal or oil. I would say it's renewable energy. If you look up American National Laboratory results, what we can see is that Mongolia's energy potential is just, I would say, one of the top. Yeah. If we can use all the solar and wind potential, then we easily supply Chinese energy demand. Mm-hmm. That's, I'm not sure how many trillion.
Yes, trillions.
We're talking about, but it's a huge potential. The problem right now is we do not have that kind of knowledge to supply that. And the government of Mongolia is doing everything to improve the legal environment for utilizing those existing potentials.
Okay, what about India-Mongolia trade relation? Mm-hmm. Where does it stand today? Mm-hmm.
I haven't looked at the details yet, but what I know is that in terms of know-how, there are very few countries that has, how I say, have the best know-hows. China, USA, Japan, India. Yeah. And India is in among top 5. Mm-hmm. And there is, in terms of know-how, Mongolia has much to learn, like starting with how to, there is a printer, right? Like how to even make a printer. We don't have that know-how, but India has. But I wouldn't say doing printers in Mongolia is the best business idea. I would say the best business ideas lie in agriculture,
okay,
energy. And
India is already working on a major oil refinery project.
That's correct. Yeah. And India is working with Mongolia in building the first big refinery project. I was there on last Friday. Oh. I met with Indian, the president of the company which is building, in charge of the construction. And also met with the Chinese counterparts as well. Those Chinese counterparts, they're building a 530 kilometers pipeline to the refinery. So there is an oil resource. The oil will be not shipped, but transferred through pipeline to reach the refinery.
Oh, okay.
And there's all the civil engineering part. Most of the civil engineering construction has been done. Now they are moving into more factory-specific construction in Dulguun province.
Thank you so much for this conversation, such thoughtful analysis of Mongolian economy. Thank you.
Thank you.